sometimes as a DEI leader and an HR leader, I would say we're like this island of misfit toys, if you, so to speak, where you belong everywhere yet nowhere. Because your role is to help the company be successful through human strategies and human capital. Companies succeed because of their people, not in spite of them.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Angela Roseboro, who is a culture transformation leader, tech executive, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, and former chief diversity officer at Riot Games, DropBox, and Jones Lang LaSalle. During the episode, Angela shares how to sustain DEI commitment amid layoffs and economic downturns. She talks about the role of AI and ChatGPT in shaping DEI initiatives, the evolving role of the Chief Diversity Officer, and how to overcome resistance to DEI initiatives. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Angela, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
If I had an award for the best glasses ever featured on the podcast, you would win. They are that I couldn't even do it justice to describe those glasses to our audience who are just listening right now. They're a statement. Let's just put it that way.
I asked my husband this morning how they look. He's like, they're kind of giving me grandma vibes.
No, but it's like I don't know how you pull it off, but it's like modern, fresh grandma vibes. I don't know. It's like a combination of young, fresh. But I get his point.
So anything that has like a little chain, I love it. So I'm bringing chains to glasses back.
Anyway, how you been? It's been a while since we last spoke.
It's been a while. You know, I am rested, I am recharged, and I recognize that that it's a privilege, honestly, to be able to take some time and reflect. And I'm super grateful. So I sit in gratitude almost every day. So it's been good. I've been taking up different hobbies, keeping abreast of what's going on in our HR and DEI worlds, and just looking at it from the outside, having lots of opinions about it.
Yeah. For context, for the audience, how long was your last role was at Riot Games as Chief Diversity Officer? How long was you there for?
I was there for 4 years.
Wow.
And decided that, there was a point where everything was going on in the US with George Floyd and the pandemic. And I remember telling the company, it was this hashtag, you need a minute, because I was so concerned about the mental health of our employees. And then I recognized I need a minute. And I took the minute. And as scary as that venture was, I'm here, 6 months later, and saying it was probably one of the best decisions that I could have made for my mental health, my physical health, my relationships. And so it's been a really scary, but yet peaceful time.
Yeah. Delve into a little bit more, because I often talk about, we often talk about the HR leaders and, who do they go to when they're struggling, right? And I think that's something that they share in common with the DEI leaders like yourself.
Sometimes as a DEI leader and an HR leader, I would say we're like this island of misfit toys, if you, so to speak, where you belong everywhere yet nowhere. Because your role is to help the company be successful through human strategies and human capital. And it starts with this premise that companies, and I truly believe this, companies succeed because of their people, not in spite of them. But I also think that people somehow get caught up in the mix of almost commoditized in a way. And so we have the role and the responsibility to make sure that every day when you come into our offices, you choose us because of how, because of the total employee life cycle. And when you're doing that, sometimes you're on the opposite spectrum of other opinions. And so and while we touch everything, I think we sometimes think that HR is more operational, and I think HR is transformational. I think your human capital makes your company transformational and not relegated to the tasks like operational things like how do you do benefits and how do you do that. It's really around culture. We are really the culture stewards, and that's a awesome opportunity and a heavy burden.
Yeah, and something you said to me last time, which stuck with me, and I can't remember the exact words. So you tell me how you mentioned it, but you said when the D&I initiatives are going badly, it's D&I's fault. Everyone goes to D&I, what's happening? But when they're going great, the business done well.
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's you say it better than me. You say it.
Yeah. No, you're kind of behind. Like the thing about DEI is like you're not the owners of things, you're the influencers. So my ability to influence you to do a different tactic or different operation is where I think my biggest bang is. The fact that I'm also an HR professional, I can not only visualize it, I can build it. My job is to convince the TA team and to work with the TA team to have strategies to increase representation. And so if it doesn't happen, then it's like, well, DI didn't do its job. But if it does happen, TA did a great job. And so when you talk about DI leaders who feel like they're undervalued, those are the types of things that we experience.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? And you can smile about it now on the other side, but obviously I'm sure at the time it doesn't feel so great. What have been your observations over the last 6 or 12 months in the space? Because from when we last spoke to now, boy, has the world changed again.
I think DEI has ebbs and flows, to be honest. And I think because we have thought about it more performatively versus strategically, you're reacting to events versus saying, this is part of our business. And our business is to innovate, create. And if you see DEI as an opportunity to help you do that, those are the companies that are going to understand this as a long-term strategy. If you see it as something's happened, we need to fix it, then it's going to be short-lived, short-term, and you'll go back to where you were. And I think that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing there was a whole bunch of hiring with DEI professionals. Some were coming from parts of the organization that didn't have the craft, quite honestly. Some were opportunistically, some great opportunities for some leaders to really do some work. And there was all of this commitment to it. And you start to see it wane. I'd say it takes 3 years from where a company says it wants to be in this space to where it actually commits to wanting to be at the end.
Yeah.
And I think what you're seeing now is, okay, I think we've gotten past this. Maybe we can pull back.
Really?
And I don't think this is something where you can pull back. Now, honestly, Chris, when I did this 30 years ago, I really thought this job would be a short-term stint. I was going back into HR. I started it because the concept of this is so easy for me. It is, hey, you have great people with different perspectives. If you allow them to unleash their superpowers, you're a better company because of it. You know your customers better, you know your employees better, you know your product better. And that's such a simple concept and construct for us to dive into. And yet 30 years later, and then I had kids who had a very different experience in the world than I did. So they had very diverse friends. I didn't have that. They had that. And so we would just naturally, the evolution of this, you would get it. And to see that we're still, 30 years later, having these conversations, somewhat sad to me, but also I think somewhat, if I look, kind of retrospectively, we never saw this as a business imperative. And we have to see it as that.
Yeah.
As you do a marketing strategy, as you do an IT strategy, this has to be seen as a business imperative.
What advice would you give to people then about how they can sustain DEI commitments, amid the layoffs, amid the economic downturns?
I think that, there's business decisions you have to make as a business, right? So I do think that you have to do what's best for the business. I think that, at least from a DEI perspective, that for you to get out of this downturn, you're going to have to be innovative. You're going to have to still think about how you bring the best people to the table, and how you not only bring them there, that you keep them. And so I think it's very short-sighted to say, okay, we're going through this cycle, we're going to lay off the DEI folks, only to come back and say, oh, something else happens, we're going to bring people back. I think it does talk about commitment. And I tell leaders all the time, there's a difference between supported leadership and committed leadership. And most are supportive. Supportive, like, oh yeah, if you do that, we're behind you. Committed leadership is, this is what I'm going to do. This is my priority. This is how I'm going to help. This is how I see how people help the company attain its goals. And I think we lose sight of that, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. How do you identify which one of those buckets a leader sits in?
I think most sit in support. I love to see when a CEO stands up in front and talk about diversity from their own perspective, from their own experience, and stand in front of it. And I think that's why I think it's so important that these roles report into the CEO, because they have to be the partnership. And I used to say to my CEO, if you can't hear me and I can't hear you, then I think we're done. Because we have to be able to hear each other and you have to be able to hear that perspective. And so I'm always encouraged when I see a CEO stand up and commit. I was on a panel once and it was CEOs and me. I don't know how I got on this panel, but it was CEOs and myself. And we were talking about diversity. And I said, everyone in this room could change and we could fix this in the next 10 years if each of you, after this panel, commit to saying that I'm going to have a woman or a person of color on my succession plan. You change the landscape. And we know what I do know is that representation matters and diversity begets diversity. And so if the CEOs would actually say, I'm committed to this and I'm going to look for my best talent and I'm going to ensure that in the mix is a woman and a person of color, I think we change it. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have we have more women CEOs than we've ever had, but still the number is low considering how many women are in the workplace and how many women are aspiring to do that, right? So yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on sort of the recent backlash around the woke agenda and sort of navigating the resistance that we're seeing towards DEI initiatives?
We're politicizing human capital, which I think is just not the right way to talk about it. And I think when we get away from the fact that this is a business decision, and then we started to bring it in and we start to really go into the fact that, oh, this is about how I feel about a person or whatever. I think it's kind of muddies why we're doing it. I think the backlash, from my perspective, we haven't done enough. I'm a person who's impacted by that. And from others' perspective, we talked about it too much. And I don't think you can ever talk about how you create great talent strategies too much. I think that is the basis of your business. Yeah. So the backlash is the political side of it.
Yeah.
The backlash is that we're taking an agenda that was really meant, honestly, to allow you to hire the best talent that's available. And we've made it a political conversation. And we shouldn't have done that. How do we get back to this? To the essence of it? The essence of it is, how do you attach it to your business? If you don't have great people, your business will not be successful. If you don't have great people with different perspectives and different ways to help you innovate, you won't be successful. And I think innovation comes from every place in your organization, and we need to be having that conversation. Mm-hmm. Instead, we're having conversations about who's getting advantages and who isn't. I've always said diversity and inclusion is not about creating advantages for some people. It's about removing barriers so that we're all successful. And I think about it as, I want everyone to be successful. And I have a little analogy about how I think about it. I watched this movie 42. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was about Jackie Robinson. Mm-hmm. And Branch Rickey, he knew a couple of things. He knew that Black people were going to watch baseball. The Negro League was very popular. He wanted that income, that money, and he wanted to integrate and he wanted to have the best player. So he brings in Jackie Robinson, but he doesn't just bring in Jackie Robinson and say, hey, go play. He was his mentor, his sponsor. He encouraged him. And at the end of that, they won the World Series. Jackie Robinson is Rookie of the Year. That is, to me, the best example of how this works in a way that you see talent, you understand the business need, you support that talent and how it comes out and you win in the end.
And the business won. They made a lot more, and they made a lot more money. So,
yeah. And the business. Yeah. And they're not exclusive. So I think we have to get back to that fundamental why talent matters. Yeah. Forget about anything else, like why talent matters.
Yeah. We're not having conversations around the right thing.
Right.
How have you seen the role of the Chief Diversity Officer evolve, and where do you think it's going to head in the future?
I ask people a lot because, why we do this work. Because, why do we choose to do this work? Yeah. It's a hard job, and anyone who's in it knows how hard it is. You are the disruptor. You are the change agent. Some people are comfortable where they are, and you're trying to push someone. You're trying to push it forward. And I think we do it because we believe in the impact that it has. We believe in the business case. We believe in, I know for me, it was when I saw people be successful, that was it for me. The evolution of this, I think it's good. I knew probably 2 years ago, the DEI role was in trouble. And I think it's because the people who've been doing it for a long time have gotten fatigued. I think the people who are coming into it really have to have an understanding of what they're trying to do. And I think we're going to have to rectify and kind of align with what this role is. And I don't think companies know what they want to do when they bring in a chief diversity officer. They're like, oh, we should do it because X company's doing it. And I think if companies spend more time saying, I have a client right now that wants to have a chief diversity officer, and I'm like, why?
Yeah, I bet they can't answer you.
They can't answer the question.
No, because everyone else has. Yeah.
Yeah. Or what does success look like in this role? And they're like, I don't know. And would you do that with any other role?
Nope.
Like
No way.
if I'm in an HR role, like why do you need a head of HR? They can tell me this is why I need a chief people officer role. If you ask them why I need a diversity role, oh, we want to do the right thing sometimes, or we want to be competitive, but they haven't really stood in the why. And I think that's, it's because, something happened and they feel like they need it. People have complained. I remember I was in a role and the CEO said to me, well, your role is to make sure the ERGs are happy. Like, well, that's why that was not what I thought my role was.
Wow.
And so even that alignment of what the role is, I think I'm here to help you build business.
Yeah.
And expectation was, I don't want to hear from the ERGs.
Oh my God.
And I think, and until us as chief diversity officers ask why you need this role, and help, and help them build that, I think you should use consultants. Like if it's just to be a crisis manager, then get a consultant. Don't get a chief diversity officer, because it's painful to go into a role where you want to have impact, only to be sidelined and not be able to have the impact that the company thought it wanted.
Yeah, and it's good questions right there. Note them down, everyone. Those questions will tell you immediately whether right there you're destined to fail. If that's the response that you're getting, or lack of responses. Actually, lack of responses tell you even more than a response.
It really does. I had a person that they have a role open, and they were saying that the DEI role reports the HR role, but the HR function was terrible. And I'm like, so why would you put the DEI person in the role? Fix the HR function. So I think again that goes back to structure.
Yeah.
It goes back to what people expect of this role. And I think people should be clear. Otherwise, you find yourself where we are now, where, well, do we really need that role? Do we need that level of a role? Do we need a chief? Because those are the conversations that I'm having now. Like, do we need that role? Could it be a lower role? We don't want to get rid of it, but we don't really know what to do with it. We don't have a problem right now. Why should we do anything? And I think when you have that sort of short-term thinking, the DEI person is destined to fail.
What have you learned now, being on the other side as an advisor and a consultant to these DEI leaders, that you perhaps didn't see when you was on the other side, when you're in the work?
I was in this at this conference, and they were talking about the title of the conference was how DEI leaders are ruining the culture, which was very hard for
Whoa,
me.
it was
very hard for me to hear, and I'm going. And what I'm finding is that, and this is the tension I think that can sometimes happen between the HR function and the DEI function, and when they kind of report into each other. If it works great, right? I think it could be a great partnership. If it doesn't, I think what I've learned is, as a DEI leader, we expect the HR folks to know DEI principles. So when we go in, there's an expectation that that the HR folks are already with us. And what we haven't done, so we start talking to the business right away. I think we need to start talking we need to have a really tight alignment with our HR folks right away. And that alignment, that partnership should be super strong before you go out to the business. Otherwise, you'll go to an HR. I'll talk to an HR person. I'll say, hey, this is going on. They're like, oh, well, you go over there. We're working over here. And even though you report into each other, it's like two different functions,
Yeah.
and you're not in line. And I think that structure either has to work or you have to move DI out. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why you hear a lot of DI folks say we should report to the CEO, because we do touch a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that. I'm also coaching a lot of new DI leaders who may have the passion and the commitment, but may not have the consulting skills, may not have the how do I interact with leadership skills. And I'm coaching them on how to have conversations with
How
leaders.
to
And so,
influence. Yeah.
yep, how to influence. And I think that how to be resilient, because it's not just I have a lot of folks who came into DEI that came from different parts of the organization, and you have to see this as a craft. So I'm seeing that not only do the people who are committed to and passionate, they have to learn their craft, but that the business doesn't see it as a craft, which is the thing that I talked about earlier. And I had a meeting with a leader, and they were saying, "Oh, you should hire this person. They're very committed to DEI." And I said, "Would you?" I said, "I want. You know what? I think I should be the CFO." And he goes, "Why?" I'm
Because
like,
I'm really
"Because
committed. It's such a good point. Yeah, I'm
I'm
passionate about
passionate. Don't find
that. Yeah.
and I love money, so you should make me the CFO." Like, that's just a ridiculous notion.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's so true.
passion for this role, but you have to have craft to be a CFO. And so we laughed about it, but it was like, yeah, I should be the CFO because I'm passionate about numbers. And so I think that's what I'm seeing now.
That's so interesting. And I see that a lot as well with some of the DEI leaders that I interview. Like, not to say not doing a great job, but I can tell the difference
Yeah,
between the ones that are really business focused and
right.
looking through that lens, as opposed to others that were put in that role because they was identified by the business who's someone who had the passion. And it's very,
Yeah,
very clear when I'm having a conversation who's who.
exactly.
Even with my limited experience of what I do, I'm like, okay, that's where you are right now, as well. So interesting. There's been a lot of talk about AI, ChatGPT, and other things like that. How do you see that,
Yes.
the role of that in D&I initiatives and moving forward?
I've been thinking about that so much, and it's almost like the Terminator. If you ever watched the Terminator, it's this loop. Who's building AI systems? How are who's in there helping doing that coding is going to be super, super important
Yeah.
around, kind of. I'm doing this thing on TikTok where they're doing AI, and it looks nothing like. I'm like, who did that AI? Who did that coding that was supposed to be able to tell me? So I don't think it's too late. I do think that we're going to have to be very cognizant as we're building those algorithms, how they're coded. And I think that happens when you have diverse perspectives in the
Yeah.
room. I
Who's
think it's
training it,
super
right? Who's training it?
training.
Yeah.
And so I love the evolution of it. I'm afraid of it a little bit, because if it goes wrong, that it just perpetuates the micro inequities and aggressions and the biases. And I'm hopeful that there are stop gaps and points
Hmm.
where people have to relook at their algorithms, when we talk about the AI. So I love it though. I think that if it's done well, I think it could be hugely helpful. I just think this is also around anytime a human touches it, bias is there.
Inherently. Yeah. Mm.
It's innately there. So the amount of diversity or checkpoints, even if you don't have people coding, this is where I think ERGs become super important, right? Where you can get perspectives. And so I think we should always have touch points, checkpoints, to make sure that we are doing this in a way that is responsible and inclusive.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think where I see the most opportunity is in the hiring process for
Yes.
using AI, generative AI, to make sure everyone has that equal opportunity, but also the sort of the candidate experience.
To your point, it's a total experience. And it's also about how you engage. This is where inclusion comes in, how you are listening, when people are giving you feedback. And I think about different examples where, I don't know if you remember the H&M example where they had the little black boy it
No,
was
I didn't
about
see
maybe
that.
4 or 5 years ago. So it was child models, and they were different ones had different sweatshirts on. And they had a black boy, and it says the coolest monkey in the jungle.
Oh no, it didn't.
And you're like, how does that happen? Like how?
No one saw that. Like no, like that.
Yeah.
Oh
And
my.
I,
Oh.
and I think that there are three ways that happens. One, you have no diversity in the room. So one, you have diversity in the room and they try to
Too,
tell you like, oh,
or they're too scared to speak up because you don't have that culture
yes,
of
exactly.
that
Yeah,
psychological
exactly.
safety. Yeah.
Right,
Probably
exactly.
was that. I guarantee you there was someone that
It could
saw
be
that.
that. It could be
Yeah.
that they did speak up and they're like, no,
That's
you don't know
true.
what you're talking about.
Mm.
Or they were so exhausted, they're like, all right, they've I call it quit and stay. Like, you know what, you go do that and see how that works for you. Right.
Yeah. Like, good luck.
And
Yeah.
that should like those types of things should never happen if you have the right perspectives in the room and they're allowed to be a consideration.
What are your thoughts on? I'm seeing a lot of conversations around the intersectionality of sustainability, purpose, and DEI. Sort of, I'm seeing a lot of DEI leaders talking about sustainability, which wasn't something I really heard a conversation being had a couple of years ago, if that makes sense.
Like, I think you're trying to put too much into a conversation that you haven't even really advanced on any of them. So to kind of put them all together at this point, I think could kind of dilute or lessen what impact you're trying to have, because now you're trying to make it this bigger thing. And sustainability, and I've been hearing about this and how companies are putting it as part of their shareholder their shareholder reports. I think each are important in their own right. Putting them together, honestly, I don't understand what the goal is there. It's like you're having three conversations in one and not giving those conversations the level of discussion that each one of them needs, right?
What would you say is this is quite a big question, but what would you say is the biggest challenge that you had to overcome in your career?
Working on something, I'm always very cognizant of, I want to get to the right answer. I love math in that way. And I think sometimes in my effort of doing right, I lose people along the way. So that notion of how to get people to follow and inspire versus this is the right answer. I learned that very early on in my career where I had the right answer. And because of I was so focused on being right, I didn't bring people with me. The company lost out. I lost out. I was in the end, I was right about it, but I wasn't able to change and help the company. I lost all credibility. And that's when I thought the importance of influence, the importance of you can't do things in a vacuum, particularly when you're doing when you're in HR and when you are in DEI, because it could be the right thing. So I think that's something that I learned early on, that influence was a key component to being a leader.
It's such an important lesson because when I speak to your peers, they always say to me, Chris, don't try and make change too quickly. They spend the first maybe 6 months to a year just understanding the business, building those relationships, building the trust with those stakeholders, and then, and only then, start to try and influence and lead change, as opposed to going in, this is what we're going to do, right? But this is how we're going to do it, and all of a sudden everyone puts their walls up and it just fails. That way, and many people have learned the hard way, including me, that that's not the way you do things.
I also think for me, it is where I'm at in this space is when I was doing this work early on, I always tried to say, I have to say inclusion except for. And so my own personal identity, I would try to keep out of conversations. So I never talked about being my experience as a woman, as a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
The older I get, and I also think when you're young in your career, people are trying to mold you into things. And I had a mentor who I was telling him how people didn't hear me in meetings, and he's like this CEO, he goes, well, speak louder. Like, well, no, this is not about me speaking louder. This is about people not hearing me. And so I used to try to, assimilate more. It just felt like a suit that was too tight. And so I have my own story, my own path. I am a disruptor, and it took a long time for me to embrace that and say, and as a disruptor, you're going to fit in certain places, you're not going to fit in certain places, and you got to be okay with that. You have to be okay that when I tell that truth, that everyone's not going to want to hear it. Do I not say it? Do I say it? To be true to myself, I have to say it. So I think what I would say to people is that I have to be, this whole notion of imposter syndrome, I don't like people to claim it, because I think it just don't claim that. There may be people who have more experience than I have, been there longer, but my biggest advantage and my currency is my perspective, and don't lose that. And have the courage to push through and have the conversation, because you'll get to the other side. Like, I'm in my 50s. I'm like, I got to the other side. And sometimes I got hurt. Sometimes it was like, yeah, it's time to go. And I had to let it go. But in each of those things, I learned something. So I learned how to be better at those things. And I also learned what my boundaries were.
Yeah, it's important.
And who I was. And so if it doesn't fit, sometimes things don't work out and it doesn't fit. But I feel very good about every move that I've made. I've done it with integrity, and I've kept who I was.
It's so important, right? Because and part of that is that's where the growth happens. That's where the learning happens. That's where me and Shane always, one of our mantras is seek discomfort. Doesn't sound really positive to people. What do you mean to seek discomfort? Because that's where the magic happens. That's where the growth happens. And if you're always trying to conform and fit into a specific narrative or please people, then you ain't gonna get far in life. I'm telling you, or you will, but you'll be very miserable along the way, and you won't feel fulfilled. You won't feel like you're making impact. You definitely won't feel like a disruptor along the way. And I think that's amazing advice. I was going to ask you for a parting piece of advice, but that was a pretty good piece of parting advice. So anything else you'd give?
If you're afraid, do it anyway. Like, that's why, like, if you're afraid, and we just had this conversation, do it anyway. It may not work out, but that's okay. Like, I think we're so conditioned that, like, we don't want to fail. I don't think I've grown to your point, every place I've grown, I failed. And people ask me to talk about successes, and I'm like, yeah, I think that's great. But man, you should see my failures. You see my battle scars, because that's where, you found out who you are. You found out what you made of. You know that you're going to get through it. And so I look back on this and said, in each of those things, I lived through it, and I lived my own truth and my own purpose. I think like imposter syndrome is a purpose killer, because and I was telling you this earlier, that you get this idea in your head that I can do it, and then 5 negative thoughts go, oh no, we just talk ourselves out of stuff all the time. All the time. Do it anyway. And you're going to learn. It may be uncomfortable, to your point, but you're going to learn so much, and you're going to live through it, right? You're going to be okay.
Listen, I could talk to you forever. I absolutely love chatting with you. And I'm really happy for you, genuinely, and this super excited for whatever's next, and whatever, keep us up to date. Let us know.
But to your point, very scary. But I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. And where can people connect with you if they want to reach out?
So I'm on LinkedIn. You'll hear, and I will talk about battle scars on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter. My website will be up pretty soon. It'll be theroseborogroup.com. Look for that.
And for everyone listening, all of those links will be below. So wherever you're listening or watching right now, all of the links will be in the description. So make sure you do that. Go connect with Angela. But apart from that, I wish you all the best, and I look forward to doing this again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your support, Chris, too. Thank you so much.